There was a buzz in the ballpark for Pride Night on Wednesday night. And for a while there, the Orioles were matching that buzz with their play on the field. But it didn't last, unfortunately, as the O's fell to the Reds in extra innings and dropped the series. And I'll recap it all coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is Thursday, June 29th, 2023, and welcome back into the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb. And coming up on today's episode, we are going to recap a crushing Orioles 11-7 extra inning loss to the Cincinnati Reds on Wednesday night as they dropped the series. I'll get to the 5 things you need to know from that one, including the Orioles comeback, another big day for Jordan Westburg, and a second straight tough start for Kyle Gibson. Then we'll talk a little bit about roster construction and what two guys who played a big role in different ways on Wednesday, Keegan Akin and Jordan Westburg, show about how the O's should manage this roster moving forward this season. And finally, some thoughts on Pride Night. I was in the ballpark on Wednesday and really a cool atmosphere at Camden Yards. But that's all coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast, which is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. So we start today with an Orioles loss as they fall 11-7 to the Cincinnati Reds on Wednesday night in 10 innings. Orioles dropping 2 out of 3 in the series after winning the opener on Monday 10-3. They lose the next 2 to the Reds, and the Orioles now 48-31 on the season. And I'm going to get you the 5 things you need to know from the Orioles 11-7 loss in extra innings. And the first thing you need to know is, well, despite the loss in this one, these Orioles really never say die. They do not go down without a fight. And we saw it in the 8th inning of this one. Orioles trailing 7-4 heading into the bottom of the 8th. Buck Farmer is out there, the setup man for the Reds, who has been so good this season. He retires the first 2 batters of the inning in Austin Hayes and Gunnar Henderson. And it's looking like, okay, this is going to be kind of a roll it over Orioles loss on Wednesday night. Then Aaron Hicks pokes a single through the right side. Then Jordan Westburg rips an RBI double down the line. And then Adam Frazier on a 2-0 pitch delivers another home run. This one into the flag court, and all of a sudden, the Orioles have a 3-run 8th inning when they had nobody on and 2 outs, and they tie the game at 7. I mean, what a comeback it was. Unfortunately, it didn't end up in a win, but these are the 2 teams with the most comebacks in baseball this year. And the Orioles just continue to do it. And I know they didn't win the game, but it's still fun to see them rally the way they do. And I mean, they even tried in the 11th, right? They were down 11-7. Hayes gets the infield hit. We thought Hicks was hit by a pitch. Unfortunately, he wasn't, and the O's eventually go down, but they fight every time out there. Did it on Tuesday night as well. Second thing you need to know from this one is that Jordan Westburg just continued his hot start to his big league career. Once again, got the start in this one against a right-handed starter for the first time, starting this game at third base, his first start there, and hitting 8th. Westburg 2 for 5 with a single, a double, and an RBI on the RBI double he had in the 8th inning. 1 strikeout, no walks for him with 2 hard hit balls, now hitting .417 with an 1,000 OPS in his first 3 games. He continues to have just a professional approach. You know, he's not the most assuming player at the plate or in the field, but he just gets the job done. And the one thing that was really interesting on Wednesday night is that Westburg did start against a righty and has now started all 3 games he's been up here with Ramon Urias and Jorge Mateo both on the bench on Wednesday night. That does bode well for how much Westburg will play moving forward, and he certainly should. Third thing you need to know from this one is that the Orioles offense had the comeback, but they also started off hot in this game. We'll get to why they were in a 3-0 deficit before Cedric Mullins even grabbed a bat. But they rallied in their own way against Red starter Luke Weaver, who was not good in this one. 4 runs on 6 hits over 4 1/3 innings. But the Orioles put up a 4 spot in that first inning. They got Mullins and Rutschman on to start the frame. Ryan O'Hearn delivered an RBI single. And then with the bases loaded, Gunnar Henderson came through with a 3-run triple into the alleyway and the big wall in left field to put the Orioles up 4-3. It was awesome to see him rally like that. Yeah, they didn't score then for the next 6 innings, but first inning rally was really, really cool to watch and see the offense just jump on Weaver like they did in the first. Fourth thing you need to know from this one is that the Orioles only had a 1-run lead after 1 inning, despite scoring 4 runs, and they trailed after 2, despite scoring 4 in the first, because Kyle Gibson was bad again. After he had his worst start in an Oriole uniform on Friday night against the Mariners when he allowed 5 runs over just 3 innings, Gibson was a little better, I would say, on Wednesday night, but still was not good. 4 2/3 innings for Kyle Gibson. He allows 6 runs on 9 hits with 5 Ks and 1 walk. No homers allowed on 95 pitches. And the Reds squared him up. 9 hard hit balls against him. Now, the first 2 innings were a complete disaster. Gives up 3 in the first. Then the Orioles get him a 4 spot, get him the lead back, and he continues to throw batting practice. Gives up 3 in the second. Now, I do want to shout him out for settling down. Put up a 0 in the third, fourth, and almost through the fifth. Got through 4 2/3 innings despite a disaster first 2 frames. So he did get a little better. He never really got a little better in the start on Friday. That's why I would say Wednesday's start was still better than the one Friday night. And he did have 11 whiffs on the night on 37 swings, including 7 on 14 swings on his changeup. The sweeper was good as well. But those fastballs just did nothing. Between the four-seamer, the sinker, and the cutter, those things got hit around a lot. I didn't love what I saw from Kyle Gibson. Now, he's earned the benefit of the doubt, right? Because before these last 2 starts, he's been great for the Orioles. But he does need to pick it up just a little bit. ERA has now ballooned to 4.66. It was well below 4 before these last 2 starts. Hopefully he can figure it out his next time out there. And the fifth and final thing you need to know from this one is that although Kyle Gibson was bad, the bullpen came in and Bauman threw a scoreless inning and Coulomb a scoreless inning and Yenye Cano an inning and third 1 run. And then, Felix Bautista had this just incredible escape act in the top of the 9th after the Orioles had tied the game. He allowed an infield single to both Elly De La Cruz and Nick Senzel. And there was runners on first and third with nobody out. And all of a sudden, Bautista strikes out Joey Votto, strikes out Spencer Steer, gets Kevin Newman to ground out, and gets out of the inning, puts up a 0, and keeps the score tied. It was amazing what Bautista did. But because of that, he threw 22 pitches. All 22 were very high-stress pitches. There was no way Brandon Hyde was going to send him out for another inning. And because Gibson only went 4 2/3, and he had to use Bauman, Coulomb, and Cano, each for at least an inning, well, you were left to kind of the lesser part of the bullpen in extras when the Orioles weren't able to score in the bottom of the 9th. And whereas you looked out at the bullpen and you would say, all right, your next option is probably Brian Baker. Well, he wasn't available. Pitched on Monday and Tuesday night. Then your next option would be close, but you'd probably go to CNL Perez because he's looked a little better the last couple of outings. Well, CNL Perez also pitched Monday and Tuesday night. The Orioles are not going to use anybody 3 days in a row until they really have to late in the season. Then you also look down at the bullpen. You see Bruce Zimmerman there as your long guy. You're probably not going to use him there. And anyway, he threw 3 innings on Monday night. You're not going to send him back out there unless it's an emergency on Wednesday. So who is the only pitcher available? Well, it's Keegan Akin. You don't feel great about that, but Akin did throw a pretty dominant 1-2-3 inning on Tuesday night, one of his best outings of the year with 2 strikeouts. So you're thinking, okay, if he can close to replicate that, he can keep us in the game. Well, the fifth and final thing you need to know from the Orioles' 11-7 loss to the Reds is that Akin did not do that at all. 2/3 of an inning, 4 runs, only 2 earned, but they were all bad. 3 hits, 2 strikeouts, 1 walk, and a homer. 38 pitches for Akin, who couldn't even get all 3 outs in the 10th inning. Brandon Hyde had to bring in Bruce Zimmerman, who was on an emergency-only basis after 3 innings Monday, but it was an emergency. And Zimmerman came in and struck out Joey Votto on 3 pitches to finally end a 4-run top of the 10th. Akin was horrendous. And this is 2 out of 3 outings for Akin where he's been unwatchable. 7 runs in 2/3 of an inning Friday night, and an even much bigger spot here, 4 runs in 2/3 of an inning. And I get it's a tough spot for a reliever with the zombie runner on second in extra innings. But what's Akin doing here at this point? The ERA is now 6.85 on the year. What are we doing? And again, people trying to blame Brandon Hyde. Like, I just spelled it out for you. Gibson went 4 2/3. Baker, Zimmerman, and Perez weren't available. Keegan Akin was literally the only pitcher they could have gone to right there. You got to at least keep your team in the game. Even if you give up a run or 2, you keep your team in the game with the zombie runner. Didn't do that. And the Orioles lost 11-7 in extra innings and lost the series. But the whole Keegan Akin thing gets you thinking, is there really no better options in AAA? Like, I get that DL Hall should be a better option, but he's in Sarasota right now, lifting weights and not pitching in games. But with Akin doing so poorly and still on the roster, other guys kind of falling into that category like Jorge Mateo, and then guys like Jordan Westburg getting called up and producing for the O's. I have some questions about the roster construction moving forward, and maybe some answers lie in Westburg and Akin's recent performances, talking about what those two can tell you about the Orioles roster coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by Game Time. Buying tickets to your favorite events shouldn't be stressful. It can be stressful sometimes when you wait until the last minute, but Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the games near you, including the Baltimore Orioles. They've got killer deals on last-minute tickets, and with a best price guarantee, you can stop stressing over the tickets. Now, I just used Game Time on Wednesday night. As I record this, just recently got back from the ballpark, where I used Game Time to buy 2 tickets for my fiance and I to go have a great time at Pride Night. Unfortunately, see an Orioles loss, but it was so easy. 7:05 first pitch. I bought those tickets at 6:15. They got sent to me right through the app, and I scanned them at the gate and got in for a really good price for some good tickets out in left field as well. They've got flash deals on last-minute tickets that I took advantage of. I could see the images of the seats right there on the app, and it's just so easy to use. The app is super easy. You log on, the Orioles are right there. It's really perfect to use. So snag the tickets without the stress with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. So the Orioles fall to the Reds 11-7 in 10 innings on Wednesday night, and they have now lost 2 out of 3 in the series against Cincinnati. Off day coming up today before they finish off the homestand with 3 games against the Minnesota Twins. The big back-to-back bucket hat and Hawaiian shirt weekend is coming up. But this loss Wednesday was really tough. Like, it was really tough to swallow. I feel like I sound a little more solemn in my voice today because this is one of the harder losses to swallow of the season for the Orioles. I mean, you get the 4 runs in the first inning. You're still trailing those because Gibson was awful. Then you get the awesome 3-run 8th, the Frazier homer to tie it. Bautista slithering out of that jam in the top of the 9th. You think all the momentum is on your side. And then Keegan Akin comes in. And as I explained, he had to. There was no other option. But Keegan Akin comes in, gives up 4 runs in the top of the 10th, and you're done. It's over. And the O's lose the game. On the flip side, you got some positives out of the game. The comeback, the earliness, all the relievers besides Akin, Jordan Westburg doing great things again. And I guess the real question is, like, the Jordan Westburg hot start last few games and the Keegan Akin disasters the last few games. Like, what can that tell us about how the Orioles should manage this roster down the stretch this season? Because, they're at 48-31. As I speak right now, late on Wednesday night, Rays are trailing 2-0 in the 8th inning at the Diamondbacks. So as long as Arizona can finish that one out, Orioles would remain just 4 games back of Tampa for first place in the AL East. The O's are 2 games away from being at the exact halfway point of the season. You can start to really, measure some things about how you're going to play this out down the stretch, because this team is going to be competing for a playoff spot. There's no doubt about it. 4 games back in the division. They hold the first wild card right now as we speak. That means you might have to cut some bait on some guys. The grass can be greener. Jordan Westburg is showing that. Now, it's not always greener, right? Grayson Rodriguez had his struggles. He was good. He'll be back, but he was also bad at times. That's why he's in AAA. Although 6 innings, 1 run, 8 strikeouts for Rodriguez on Wednesday night in AAA. Another good sign. I'm thinking he might be back soon to the major leagues. But it can be better. And I think the O's have a chance to learn here that, you don't have to keep holding on to these guys. There's players on the team right now, like Keegan Akin, number 1, 6.85 ERA. Austin Voth, I know he's on the injured list, so it's a little different, but he's one of them. CNL Perez is one of them. Jorge Mateo is one of them. And I wouldn't put this guy in this category yet, especially with the vertigo. But Ryan Mountcastle, if he comes back and really continues to struggle, could be in this category too. It's the category of they were once good. The peripherals and the promise and the potential still show that they can be good, but the on-field results are not there. And the sample size is getting big enough of the results not being there that it's hurting your team and it's becoming not worth it to keep them around. Like all of these guys that I just mentioned, they have some big upside. And there's reasons they're still here. CNL Perez had a 1.4 ERA last year. Throws 97 from the left side with a wipeout slider. But it hasn't been pretty this year, but the O's know what he can do. Austin Voth came over, had a 3.5 ERA in 15 starts with the O's last year. He was great. The data on his breaking balls are ridiculous. That curveball sweeper combination is nasty. But he just hasn't been good this year. Jorge Mateo could be the fastest player in baseball. He's got some pop in the bat. He's a Gold Glove level shortstop. And he showed in April that he can hit a little bit, but it's been a disaster since then. Keegan Akin throws a lot of strikes, had an awesome first half last year, had some really good starts for the Orioles in the rotation in 2020. Has a fastball that rides up on guys and has good data. Results aren't on the field. Now, if this were still the middle of the rebuild Orioles, if this were any time, June of last year and beforehand, you hold on to all these guys because they have the traits where you say they've done it before, they're struggling now, but we can get them to do it again because they have the traits. This is a different team. 48-31, right in the mix in the playoff race. You can't afford to hold on to the guys who have the traits but aren't producing. And the Orioles showed that a little bit when they sent down Grayson Rodriguez. Grayson's got more of the traits than any of these guys I've mentioned combined, but he was hurting the team because some of his starts were really, really bad. Some were good, but some were really bad, and they sent him down. Now it's a little different with guys like Perez, Voth, and Mateo because all of them are out of options, so you would have to DFA them all. And I would say all of these guys I'm talking about would get claimed on waivers if they got DFA'd because at the very least, another rebuilding team would see the potential that the Orioles still see in these guys and say, we can tweak them a little bit, get them back to being productive, and they can be a good player for us maybe, or at least a solid player for now, or even better, maybe when we get back to winning again. They would lose all of these guys on waivers. But at some point, the scales tip in that situation of, yeah, we're scared to lose him. And yeah, we think he can become productive again because the potential is there. But I think the Orioles are at the point now. And number one, it's with Keegan Akin. I think he could be optioned before the game Friday. And I think we have a good chance of maybe seeing, potentially Nick Vespi up here. Or maybe a Darwinzon Hernandez. Potentially another lefty. But we're at the point where the production has to outweigh the potential. The potential can outweigh the production when you're rebuilding. But when you're one of the best teams in baseball, trying to make a deep playoff run and maybe beyond this year with the team that they have, production has to outweigh potential. And for Cianel Perez, for Austin Voth, for Jorge Mateo, for Keegan Akin, I'm not putting Mountcastle there yet. We could maybe have this conversation at the end of the year if it's really still that bad and he comes back. Maybe even Adam Frazier before, of course, what he did on Wednesday night. You've got options to replace them. Jordan Westburg is one of those options. You called him up. He could basically take all of Jorge Mateo's at-bats right now, and I think the O's would get better. And now maybe you don't DFA Mateo because I still think he has value off the bench. But you see what I mean here. Production needs to outweigh the potential at this point. Some of these guys who are struggling, including Keegan Akin, still have good potential, but the production's not there and it's hurting the team. So keep the same energy you had for Grayson Rodriguez for the rest of these guys. I'm done with Keegan Akin. I can give Perez maybe a little more leeway, and let's see what Mateo can do off the bench. And maybe if Voth returns, the elbow's a little better, and maybe Mountcastle returns and the vertigo's a little better. But the first step is Keegan Akin. And it's an easy step because he's got options. Just send him down to AAA, keep him there. Don't want to see him on the field. Don't want to see him off the field. I'm over it. The production is not outweighing the potential. Make the move. Whether it's adding from outside or inside the org, make the move and maybe more come with it to get this team more and more ready for the postseason. But I had one more thing to talk about here on this episode before we go. I was at the ballpark Wednesday night, my 7th game of the season. Orioles now 4-3 when I'm there. Not an amazing record, but I'll take over 500. But it was Pride Night at the ballpark, and been to a few Orioles Pride Nights already. Been to some Pride Nights at some other stadiums as well, actually. But I feel like this one really took the cake on just doing what was important about a Pride Night. And I know I'm a straight, cis, white man. Pride Night is not necessarily for me. I mean, I enjoyed the festivities. I love everything it represents. But baseball's historically for a person like me. Wanted to talk about next why we need to make sure it is for the people who don't look like me. And for everyone, this game can be for. Talk about that and Orioles pride coming up next to finish off the pod. So it was an Orioles 11-7, real tough loss in 10 innings for the Birds on Wednesday night. It's about 11:30 p.m. Eastern time as I record this here on Wednesday night. Still not over it. Generally in a 162-game season, I've kind of trained myself to let it stew for 10, 15 minutes for a tough loss. This one hurt a little bit more. Just the comeback and the 10th and the aching of it all, it hurts a little bit. I'll be over it by the morning. By the time you're watching or listening to this, I'm over the loss. I'm ready to play the Twins. But despite it being one of the more frustrating and I think disappointing losses of the year, still an incredibly positive experience at the ballpark on Wednesday night because it was Pride Night for the Orioles at the ballpark celebrating the LGBTQ plus community. And the Orioles have done Pride Nights for years now, and 29 out of 30 Major League Baseball teams do a Pride Night. Texas Rangers don't do one. Not sure what's going on over there. They're the only team that doesn't do one. But this one just seemed a little different by the Orioles. And I'm not keeping track of exactly, what goes on, what's put up, what events happen at every team's Pride Night every single year. But I've seen every Orioles one, and I've been to a few Orioles ones over the years. And this one just seemed to take things to the next level in a really good way, I got to say. And let me preface all this with the Orioles are still a huge corporation, professional sports team owned by a billionaire family. Now, is John Angelos, because of his political leanings and donations that we've seen and words he's spoken before, maybe more likely to go all out for a Pride Night than many of the other owners? Yes. You don't have to hand it to him, but I'll give him a sliver of credit to say, yes, he's more likely to do that than many other Major League Baseball owners. But again, this is a large corporation doing a Pride Night. And what we see from a lot of companies in the U.S. is putting on that face in the month of June selling their Pride products. I mean, I'm wearing a Maryland crab hat with the Pride flag in it. I bought in to buy some of these products. And then it's like it never existed for the other 11 months. And I get it. And there's questions about, how much do these corporations really care about the LGBT community? You don't really know, but it felt like the O's really did take it to the extra step on Wednesday night. And again, as I said before, I appreciate it, but it's not about what I think about Pride Night. Again, white, straight, cis man. Baseball has been for me forever. Baseball was created for me. Baseball has always been for a person like me. It's unfortunately been much more difficult to make baseball for the LGBTQ plus community, for people of color, for other marginalized communities that don't look like me. It's unfortunately been tough to do that. But I felt like the Orioles did a good job on Wednesday night. It's not just throwing the Pride Night, having the Orioles Pride hat giveaway, honoring some great members of the community who do some great work, and, having somebody cool throughout the first pitch. But it was the 6, 7, and 8, and 9 extra steps it felt like the Orioles took. Like when we saw the pictures tweeted out by the Orioles earlier in the day Wednesday, like the Pride memorabilia and the Pride flag, it was everywhere. I have not seen any other professional sports team go all out like that in their own stadium. You had the Pride flag up in the left field seats that are closed off. You had Pride flags across the outfield wall. You had the O's Pride logo behind home plate. You had a giant Pride flag painted on the outfield grass. And just from looking at it, and I've heard a little bit about it too, I think it's going to stick there for a little bit. It's not just going away when the O's come back Friday night, which is awesome as well to have it out there. You've got, Orioles Pride flags everywhere as you're walking to the ballpark, all throughout the concourse. You're honoring different people on the Jumbotron every single inning. You're honoring people who have done so much work in the LGBTQ plus community on the broadcast. Kevin Brown and Jim Palmer go sit out on the center field deck, and it felt like every other inning. I was looking up at the screens in the stadium. They were interviewing someone new who was doing something great in the community and had a great story to tell on the air. And then you take the Orioles social media team who tweets out the lineup, and then they say, we're not going to tweet about the baseball game tonight. We're going to tweet out some resources to help out our community. We're going to tweet out some facts and some unfortunate realities about what our queer friends face in the U.S. right now, what they're going through, and places you can go to learn more about it and what you can do to help. That is so much more important than what's going on the baseball field. And again, it's still coming from a giant corporation. I get it. All right. You still question how much do they really care? But put in the context of a professional sports team holding a Pride Night, I don't know if anyone's done it better, at least from my perspective, than the Orioles did on Wednesday night. It was a party at Camden Yards on Wednesday night. It was awesome to see. Baseball is for everyone. I want to make this podcast, the Locked On Orioles podcast, a place where anyone and everyone can come, share their thoughts on the Orioles, watch the games, listen to the pod, give their thoughts, give their input, interact with me with the podcast. That's my goal. If I'm not doing a good job of that, call me out for it. I want to be creating that environment here with this small Orioles community I've built with this show and this podcast. But I just really felt like, nobody's put a flag on their field for that long. Nobody's put that many flags on their outfield walls. Nobody's done that much during the broadcast and in between innings as the Orioles had. And again, still with the caveat, this is a large corporation. You can ask a lot of questions about how much they really care about you, the individual. But the O's went the extra mile. And I have to assume, and talking to some people, it tracks that meant a lot to the LGBTQ plus community of Baltimore, of Maryland, and beyond. And that's just really important. And if anything that went on Wednesday night, or if anything I just said here on this podcast in terms of why this was a great celebration of pride on Wednesday, bothers you, makes you angry, makes you upset, it's time to look in the mirror, and it's also probably time to go find another podcast. Baseball's for everyone. We need to keep it that way. And hopefully there's many more nights like this at Oriole Park at Camden Yards. But that'll do it for today's episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. Got one more episode to get to this week. Orioles have the day off here on Thursday. Then they welcome in the Minnesota Twins starting tomorrow. And on tomorrow's pod, I am going to preview that weekend series between the O's and the Twins, but also going to give out some month of June awards. Now, I do know that the Orioles Friday night game is technically still in June. So they'll have one more June game to play, but they've played pretty much all their games in June. We'll talk about the best hitters, best pitchers, best moments from the month of June for the Orioles. That's coming up on tomorrow's episode. But until then, I'm Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.